Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on transitioning from clinical nursing practice to a leadership role in nursing. My name is Dr. Patrick LaRose. I'm the Associate Dean for the College of Nursing with the University of Phoenix, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. We are excited to have you join us for what promises to be a very insightful and inspiring webinar. Nursing leadership is essential in healthcare, driving innovation, enhancing patient outcomes, and creating a supportive work environment. Nurse leaders must lead quality improvement initiatives, serve as change leaders, integrate new and emerging technologies, and inspire and empower a compassionate and experienced workforce within a complex and ever-changing regulatory environment. As we explore these issues and the requisite skills needed to be a successful leader in today's complex healthcare industry, we are joined by an exceptional panel of speakers who will share their expertise, experiences, and perspectives on how these and other vital topics. Before we begin, though, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. Brian Bates, who is the Chief Nursing Officer from Banner Casa Grande, Jonelle Ajar, the Director of Nursing from Kaiser Permanente, and Jason Wright, the Vice President of Health Services from GEO Group. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to share your valuable contributions to the field of nursing. For our audience, we encourage you to actively participate in today's discussions. Please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions or to share your thoughts throughout the webinar. We will have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end where our panelists will address your queries. Let's begin with an introduction from each of our distinguished panelists. Let's start with Brian. Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good morning, Patrick. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks everyone for being here with us today. My name is Brian Bates. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at Banner Casa Grande Medical Center here in beautiful Casa Grande, Arizona, part of the Banner Health System. Been in the CNO role since relatively new to the role, started in January of this year officially. I was in the interim for about 3 months prior to that as the CNO. Prior to that, I was a director of nursing for the emergency department and clinical care operations here at Banner Casa Grande. I've been with Banner Health a total of 5 years, having the opportunity to work at another facility within Banner as well. I've been in nursing for about 22 years now. Started my career as an ER nurse, mixed that in with some flight nursing as well, some critical care nursing in the ICU. And started my leadership journey. I guess I'm working on about 11 years now. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. Glad to have you with us today. Jason, please give us your introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. So myself, Jason Wright, being a nurse I got thinking the other day, oh my goodness, it's 31 years now, having done this in nursing. Started my nursing career in corrections 30 years ago as an LPN working in the prison system. Managed to join GEO Group in 2007, so a little over 17 years been with the company now at a facility, and since then I've had the opportunity to advance to a nursing supervisor or director of nursing role, health service administrator role at multiple facilities, overseeing the day-to-day operations of our prison facilities. Then was afforded the opportunity to be a regional manager of health services over facilities in Texas and Oklahoma for a few years, and then came into the corporate office in 2019 as the chief nursing officer for the organization. Did that with this blessed group here for almost 5 years before moving into the vice president role that I'm in now, where I'm not only still kind of overseeing the nursing operations, but working closely with our clinical and administrative operations team. So just looking forward to this, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jason. And Jonelle, your introduction.
Good morning. Thank you, Patrick. My name is Jonelle Adahar, and as Patrick said, I am a director of nursing for Kaiser Permanente. I currently am at the Riverside Medical Center here in Southern California. So I'm the Director of Nursing Services, and actually my functional role is I am currently the Magnet Program Director here as well, and I oversee the programs for clinical informatics and care experience as well. So my background of nursing is I started out as a medical surgical telemetry nurse. I'm now with Kaiser Permanente 17 years. I've been in nursing about 18 and a half years, and majority of that time, I would say probably 15 years, I've been in nursing leadership. So I've had the opportunity to be in interim roles as clinical manager, staffing office manager, but quickly I moved into areas of clinical informatics and leading different teams to where now I've been the Magnet Program Director and in this role for the past 6 years. So med-surg tele going into a lot of different areas of home health to GI, and leadership has primarily been my specialty, I would say.
Wonderful. What a great group for our panelists today. So thank you all for being here. To get us started, I'm really curious about that moment when you said, I think I want to move in from clinical nursing to a leadership role. What factors were most influential in your decision to move forward in a nursing leadership role? Jason, let's start with you.
Well, certainly when I first started realizing this is, working as the floor as a staff nurse, I was working as kind of our chronic infectious disease nurse in a facility. So I was working the routine day shift, getting patients ready for the doctor, working on tracking our chronic care patients that we had. And I kept having individuals come up to me and asking me questions on what does this policy mean? And where can I find this? And it kind of got to the role. It's like, well, if they keep asking me this, they must recognize that maybe I have an understanding. So I started asking the staff. I'm like, why do you keep coming to me with this? And they're like, well, you explain it in a way that we can understand. We really wish that you were kind of in one of these roles. And so that kind of set my wheels in motion to look at what would it take to become a leader within this organization.
What about you, Jonelle?
Kind of very similar to Jason. As a clinical nurse on my unit, I really started to engage and understand the operations of what it was like to lead, whether it's policy reference or certain workflows. And so I was given the opportunity to one day, hey, can you be charge nurse for the day, right? And that's usually when you start into your little steps of getting into that formal leadership. And because I understood the unit, how we functioned, I was becoming more of a resource to my peers and colleagues, I stepped up. And with the support of my leaders, they continue to really develop and nurture those roles in me. And very quickly within my first year of actually being on that unit, within my first official year of just being a clinical nurse, I was, given the opportunity to be an interim manager. And again, it was because of that. I felt confident in my skills and becoming a resource, a team player, and helping my peers and colleagues to ensure that, our unit was performing well. And so it was very much a confidence builder of myself, believing in my why and my purpose on that floor. And that's what essentially led to my next steps of becoming an official leader.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I think that pivotal moment for me was very similar to Jonelle and Jason. It's being the staff nurse. I take it back to my flight nursing days. I was a flight nurse on the line, taking care of patients, and had the opportunity to step into a clinical-based lead role, which is a very, clinical and operationally based responsibility at one of your air medical bases. And really the thing that did it for me was being that frontline team member who wanted to have the opportunity to bring solutions to the table. And, as that frontline team member who's always saying, gosh, why don't we do it this way? Or why can't we do it this way? And having the opportunity to be in a leadership role where you have the chance to kind of drive that change or make that change to do things for the better. And I'll take it a step further too. The next role I had at the time with the same organization was in a business development role. So I was a regional business development role. And again, recognizing that there was opportunities from past leaders and seeing where there's opportunities where and wanting to be able to have an opportunity to impact that change and make that difference, and rather than just being the one who complained about it, I wanted to be the person who brought that to the table and maybe and had the opportunity to make that change. And that's really what led me from moving from that frontline team member and being the clinical person at the bedside to really being in a leadership role where I had an opportunity to make the change that supported the business as well as the frontline team.
That's perfect. That leads us right into our next topic of conversation is, how do you balance the expectations of clinical expertise with the strategic responsibilities of a clinical leadership role? Where do you see the biggest disconnect for new nurse leaders during this transition? Jodelle, can you share with us your experience? Where do you think that biggest disconnect might be?
Uh, You know, Patrick, I think back to just some of figuring out, life with work challenges, but at the same time ensuring that there's life balance, that there's, preventing burnout. I think about a lot of the clinical things from shifting from clinical nurse to leadership is all the extra demands that you have, because you're now dealing with, growing and leading people. So it's the relationships that you're building. And so I think about a lot of that is, having effective communication, really honing into those skills of communicating, supporting the systems, but having the time still for self, that self-care, and ensuring that besides me doing that as well, am I also honing in for my staff and who I lead? Are my team members also taking that time to have that work-life balance and supporting that with them? At the same time, also, leading that and showing that as an example. So I think when we really went into those transitions, you got to think about what are the demands on self, relationships, at the same time, supporting the teams, but really just remembering, to really align with, your purpose, your vision, and how to support. And that really just helps me, at least I could say from my personal experiences, yes.
I love the fact that you brought in that work-life balance and balancing the expertise that you have clinically with the new leadership role and how that all works cohesively together. It kind of reminds me of I think, we've spoken before. It kind of reminds me of that issue where, well, she's a wonderful nurse. She should be a terrific leader, right? And we move those nurses from that bedside capacity into a leadership role. And sometimes we don't necessarily assess what are those requisite skills that are really going to help, that clinical nurse who has been hugely successful be as equally successful as a nurse executive or a nurse leader to some extent. So Brian, to that, my question for you is that what type of experience skills should we be imparting on our future nurse leaders? Give us your experience. What skills did you have that helped you to move into that leadership role? And what skills did you need? I mean, that old adage of fake it till you make it, I don't know that we can do that, can we?
No, I mean, I think that eventually will catch up to you as a leader. I was given that advice many years ago by another leader, who said, if you climb too fast, eventually that catches up to you, and then the only direction you go is you fall or you move out of the organization. So I do think it is important to be strategic and tactful as you grow as a leader. Some of those key skills, I think that when I think back on how do I identify someone who I think is ready for a leadership role, it's really, you hear a lot of terms like emotional intelligence. I do think that's very important, though. I think people have to really have a good self-awareness of where they are and who they are, and be comfortable in a place to be self-aware of the things that they handle very well, and be comfortable with the things that they don't handle very well. And as you move further away from the bedside or from the clinical expertise, you have to get more comfortable with really relying on those other subject matter experts that you have in those spaces, and being comfortable with how they handle that and trusting what they do. And as you trust them, you build that trust with them, which then grows them even more as a leader. So I think people really have to be in touch with their feelings, their emotions, how to control those things. When I think of those pathways, even now, we really, Jonelle talked about charge nurse, right? I think that's a great next step for that frontline team member to be able to demonstrate how do they lead a team. So they're leading that team for the shift. We like to empower those charge nurses to have that bandwidth to, obviously they can't make, HR type personnel decisions, but they can certainly manage the team in the moment on the floor, and how they handle that, how they handle the adversity, is really those skills that we look for. Do they stay calm under pressure? Do they escalate things appropriately, either in the moment or the next day, depending on how severe the situation is? How do they interact and communicate with their multidisciplinary partners and radiology or the physicians or other modalities, and how they show those? Because it's you can have strong clinical skills, but you got to have good people skills too, and be able to really provide that communication and that collaboration even when things are really tough. So I think those are those skills that you put with the clinical strength to really identify the next step for a person. And as they continue to grow and develop, you continue to see how they hone those skills and how those skills now develop into how does that translate into how they communicate with other leaders and leaders above them. And then as they grow even more, how do they communicate with leaders below them? And those are those personable skills that you're really looking for.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Brian. I'm taking away the idea of emotional intelligence, empowerment. And so, Jason, I'm going to come over to you with that. And so, how do you work to establish leadership competencies for growth within the nurses that work within your organization that deals with conflict resolution, delegation, clinical decision making? How do we get there?
And that takes time, takes practice, and like you said, it takes building those competencies. I mean, Brian was really putting a lot of that into play, especially when you deal with communication. Um, one of the biggest things I learned on early as a nurse leader is I had a leader as we were going through this. How do you deal with conflict? How do you understand where I'm going to get the information from, who I need to get the information from when it comes to this, whether it's delegation? And excuse my crudeness, but they said, how do you deal with all this crap? And they said the acronym that I always use, CRAP, is that communication resolves all problems. And so by taking that, and I literally write it on my whiteboard, and it's at the very top of my whiteboard, CRAP, and people come in and it starts that conversation a lot of time. They're like, why is that up there? It's like we communicate. We have to understand. We have to learn what can we delegate? What are the skills that someone has demonstrated? And sometimes we're afraid to maybe let somebody take reins on some of these, as in a charge nurse or a position like that. But if we don't give them the opportunity, they won't grow from it. And so one of the roles that I use as a post order, so to speak, or a job description within the health services unit is a team leader, not necessarily a charge nurse, but a team lead. Help them to learn how to lead their team that's working on the shift. And by giving them those small assignments, see how they do with that. They come back, give them a bigger challenge. Then they will challenge themselves and they'll challenge others. And so that's one way that I've learned is if I don't give somebody a chance, I end up taking it all on myself, and I can't do it all by myself. And I've had to learn that. That's been my biggest challenge transitioning from a leader, from, frontline to a leadership, was how do you let go and trust someone else to do that? But you have to verify that it was done. So that's kind of the approach I have to take with my team.
That's wonderful. That scaffolded approach, I think, really helps to facilitate those skills development because there's a sense of trust, right? We get that sense of trust that, well, the leader's trusting me to do this, and so I need to do it right. So we're going to work harder to, acquire those skills. And that feedback, I think, that you provide, Jason, really helps the new clinical leader to grow. And that's something that's very exciting. In the post-COVID era, we've seen a big change in the dynamic of nursing, haven't we? A lot of nurses that have left the profession. We have a lot of new graduates coming into the profession now. So, Brian, I really want to ask you, how are you managing to hire and develop your new nursing staff? And what are your strategies for promoting workforce development, particularly in new graduates?
Sorry, get off of mute there. Um, Yes, we're fortunate, again, within the Banner Health System, we have a very robust NNE program, so New Nurse Experience, where we really do a supportive job. We connect with local colleges and community colleges and nursing colleges to really engage with those schools and then create pathways for the nurses to come into our organization as new grads. Um, we have a whole team that works within that space to ensure that they're getting into the right pathways, the right places. We have student preceptorships, so that we're really helping to support those team members find what it is and what area they want to be in. Obviously, coming out of COVID, there were lots of opportunities. A lot of nurses went off to do travel assignments and various things. And so we even found new grads dropping into areas where typically, such as the ER, ICU, some of those critical care areas where typically nurses don't usually start, but we had lots of opportunities in many spaces. I would say as we're moving further away from COVID, we're finding more nurses are returning back to, that regular workforce, not necessarily part of the travel nurse workforce, because the needs aren't quite as great as they were during COVID. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities fill, and so what we're doing now is focusing those new grads into areas where there's opportunities, such as maybe in the med surg or the PCU spaces, where you still get a very good, solid foundation of nursing, and then once they get in, they have the opportunity to move around later once a position or opportunity comes open. So locally, for me, I like to take that on as well and really participate in some of the local community colleges, advisory councils. We provide support by being a clinical site where they can come and have their students come do their clinicals and rotations, and really building those relationships. And that gives the students an opportunity to experience our facility and our culture, and then maybe consider this as a place they might want to work. So that's just a couple of the strategies that I would say we utilize here.
That's wonderful. So I'm hearing that a management skill of flexibility and networking, right? And then understanding where your need is and how to network to fill that need. That's great. Jonelle, when we look at our existing nurses that are working, how do we, as managers, what do we need to do to engage our nurses to feel that their contributions matter to the success of the organization? There's so many different stresses, right, that a nurse faces in their daily work schedule. What strategies do you use as a nurse leader to engage your nurses?
That's a great question, Patrick, and I love that because that is my passion of things and what we're really promoting. And I would say that the best way to really engage with your existing nurses is one, ensure that your structure is set up with shared decision making, a true shared governance structure in your nursing practice environment, to where it's the clinical nurses and nurses are very much at the table of every decision, whether that's hospital operations and definitely at the unit level. When it's the nurses that have their voice and they know that the leadership supports them to make those changes to improve their own practice. We talked about elevating our nurses and elevating their voice. Within that structure, that very much lets them know that we support them, and it's their efforts that are making the great outcomes, the improved patient outcomes. And then at the same time, it's really ensuring that we have structures in place for rewards and recognition. How are we recognizing these nurses then for their efforts? And at the same time, also asking them, how do you want to be recognized? We're coming close to Nurses Week, and we hear it all the time. It's like, oh, we don't want another pizza party. So as a leader, what exactly is that? How can we recognize you, and what is worthwhile and meaningful? So a shared decision-making model and structure is so important. And I think as leaders, when we truly help to navigate and support that structure, absolutely, that's when you're really honing in on that top talent of your nurses. That retention absolutely becomes, more defined and established. So that would be my recommendation.
Excellent. Excellent. That shared governance model, I think, is really important for showing nurses that the leadership of the organization has a commitment to their voice and their contribution. So that's wonderful. And so, Jason, as we move on, we've talked with Brian about what we're doing with new graduates and the importance of flexibility and networking. We've talked with Jonelle about the importance of a governance structure, and how nurses want to be recognized. So for you, I want to ask the question of how do you balance leadership and staffing responsibilities? How do you navigate the tension, especially when staffing becomes an urgent issue?
Well, it's a team effort. That's what you first have to learn is you have to reach out. You have to lean on those other individuals who have been through some of these tough times. You need to find that mentor who can help guide you within your organization. Learn not to necessarily respond emotionally to the challenges that are coming about, which can be very hard to do, especially when you've worked in a front line or if you're newer into that management role and you want to quickly jump on the side of, this is exactly what it is, but look at it a little more holistically from the organizational standpoint. Who are my resources that I can go to manage this kind of crisis situation? And don't be afraid to share your experiences and your fears of what it is. A lot of times we'll hold our fears inside. We want to act like we've got everything under control. We're the duck you see calm in the water, but our little feet are just going 100 miles an hour. And learn to collaborate with those others. Try not to silo the decision making to I'm the only one that has to make that decision. How can we do that? That's one of the biggest things that I've had to learn transitioning into this type of role.
So from that conversation, I'm hearing surround yourself with good people, but the bigger thing is know your resources, right?
Yes.
Who can I go to? Excellent. Brian, in high stress healthcare environments, nurse leaders often encounter team conflicts that are rooted in frustration, burnout, differing perspectives, and to your previous point about emotional intelligence, in this case, emotional fatigue. From your experience, what approaches have been most successful for you in dealing with these types of conflicts and hopefully to engendering a culture of trust, mutual respect, and morale among your team?
Yeah, I think is my signal still working? Had a little
Yep.
bit of a lag there. I'm sorry, Patrick. I had a little bit of a glitch. Could you repeat that?
Oh, absolutely. I was talking about, environments today are high stress, especially in nursing. So how do you deal with burnout, differing perspectives, emotional fatigue, and relationship to approaches to these types of issues with nurses? What are your strategies for engendering a culture of trust, some mutual respect, and improving morale?
Yeah, thanks for repeating. So
Sure.
I think the big thing is that I always promote with my leaders is the team has to feel supported. So whether it's burnout, whether it's long days, we had a really busy winter this past winter here. Um, just not only our facility, but in general here in the valley, it was very busy. And the one thing I told all of the leaders was no matter what you do today, if you miss a meeting, if you miss a deadline, that's okay as long as your team feels supported. So I think the big thing, and Jonelle kind of touched on this earlier, the teams have to feel supported, and how we recognize that is important. Not just a pizza party or a dozen donuts or something like that. They want to know that the work that they're doing is meaningful, and it's our job as leaders to show them how what they're doing is meaningful and impactful and supporting them in that. And if that means we miss a meeting today and we go out on the floor, we here at Casa Grande have a culture of really rounding and supporting the team. So even as a C-suite, we go out and we round on all of our team members. It's important to us that we know as many people by first name and we communicate and chat with them. And establishing that relationship and never forgetting where you came from is what I like to say, and always keeping that there is so important to the team. And when they know that they're recognized in that manner, that means a ton to them, and then they're ready to come back the next day and do what they can. And so I really think those relationships and establishing that is probably what's most important.
What resonates with me, Brian, is the sense of feeling supported. And you've really shared what that looks like to you as a clinical and nurse leader. And that's so critical overall. Janelle, what does feeling supported look like to you within your organization?
I echo so much of what Brian said, but one of the main things that also kind of resonated in my mind is the sense of visibility. Um, Support really also needs to be visible, and just like as Brian's saying, rounding and being visible physically. At times, whether it has to be virtually attending some meetings that they're also engaged in the work, or just rounding on the patients at the same time rounding with the staff is so important to really showing that and recognizing the teams for that. So the visibility is one of the key main parts that I would definitely encourage for any leader or even new leaders emerging. What does that look like for me? And yeah, going back to your why and being very open to what your why and your purpose is as you round, as you're visible. So whether it is, for a conflict situation, what fire are we putting out, but what's the why? Why are we all here? What is the purpose? The patient's at the center of everything that we do. So, as a leader, to be visible and open to share that with your teams as well, to be open to hear that from their teams, or to even inspire if they don't really know what that why is. But essentially, we're all collectively here for one organization with whatever the philosophy and the vision, mission, and purpose. So helping to bring that visibility out of what our mission is and our purpose. And sharing that collective thought together, I think, is so important. And that's really what we embrace here at Kaiser Permanente. And so that's why it connects so much with me in this organization, because that's my own personal philosophy as well as a nurse.
Wow, that's wonderful. I really love that. The why. I have to remember that one. And so, you know what? That visibility that you, Jonelle and Brian talked about in, rounding on the patients, but also rounding on the nurses. One of the things that we've heard from nurses historically is that little frustrations, right, that create this burnout or this sense of job dissatisfaction, where they can't effectively care for their patients or they can't effectively do their jobs. Jason, to this question is for you. How do you assess the tools and the resources and the equipment that your nurses need as a nurse leader to ensure that they're not frustrated doing their job and that they're able to provide the care that the patients so rightfully deserve?
Well, and I mean, it goes, like you said, right to Janelle and Brian, where they're talking about understanding your staff, what their needs, their concerns are, what we like to call the pulse of the pound. When we start talking about in the correctional or the detention environment where our teams work. My teams work, as you can imagine, in a very high stress, as we mentioned that earlier, where you're working inside a wall of, you're contained within this, and you have your audience of your patients there, which have been through their own frustrations, and they want to pour these frustrations out onto you. So one of the key things that we do is we've developed weekly meetings with our leadership. So our health service administrators have their own monthly and weekly meetings with their staff where they have their daily meetings in the morning before they get started with the team. But then we have managers and directors that are over these various facilities, and they have a weekly assessment meeting with these leaders. How are things going? What do you need? What do we need to focus on? And then we at our level here at the corporate have meetings weekly with them. We call it our weekly assessment and review. And by maintaining that constant communication and understanding what are the challenges they're facing, they're able to present up to us, here's what they need, here are some of the things that they're facing, and we're able to then kind of gauge how we can become more involved or provide those resources that they need.
Excellent, excellent. We've talked a lot about the nurses and engaging the nurses in self-governance and that sense of emotional intelligence and belonging. Let's shift gears a little bit as we're rounding out our webinar today. I'd like to shift gears a little bit to talk a little bit more about the role of the chief nursing officer in advocacy for the nursing division, right? That's a significant issue. Brian, how does that impact the overall success of the nursing division for the chief nursing officer to be able to have a voice at the table, especially in the C-suite?
Yeah, it's huge. And what I've learned so far in this role is that is why there is a chief nursing officer. That is the balance, is to balance the needs of the organization with the needs of the teams and the staff. Balancing clinical quality and safety with operational metrics and measures, and finding the happy place, if you will, in between those two things. And that is the challenge. That is my challenge every day, is to try to balance that. It's tough. There's no secret sauce to it. It's looking at every situation and analyzing it, thinking it through. What does the team need to meet that measure, and where does that measure need to soften maybe to meet what the team can do? And so in my role, I feel that's my responsibility every day, is to determine, is it something that my leaders can help drive, or do I need to maybe push back a little bit and say, well, no, that those expectations are going to be tough, and here's what we need to be successful at that. Again, it flows back and forth, in that space. So it's not an easy task, but that's the challenge that I wake up every morning and I say, okay, how do I need to support the team, or how does the team need to support the needs of the organization? And where do I find the balance so that we achieve both?
That's great. That's great. Jonelle, I want to ask a very similar question to you. Navigating conversations in the C-suite can be challenging. And as a chief nurse, what skills do you think that served you well? And what skills did you have to acquire to have those difficult, sometimes challenging conversations?
So Patrick, as my role of director of nursing, I work very closely with the chief nurse executive, and really it's to support that person to ensure that yes, nursing practice is meaning, quality and satisfactory patient care experience, and that we're really, ensuring that nursing practice is safe, and the care for both patients and the nursing staff is very much there. And so it really is, very much. It's so funny because Brian's like reading my mind with everything and the things that he talked about. So I support them really just to ensure that yes, when we look at a lot of operational decisions, we have to think wholeheartedly how how the nurses will carry out these tasks and these needs. Prioritizing, is it feasible? How is it going to be done? And what the teams do need? How do we support them to lead that? So I work very closely to ensure, thinking on that mindset of, okay, yes, we know we have to achieve this operational need, but what is the reaction of the nurses? How will they feel supported? Will they be able to do that? And a lot of times we have to go to them first and say, hey, you guys, we have this problem. This is what we're being asked to do. And how best can we achieve this with your help? And how best can we do this together and collaborate with them so that really every nurse from bottom to top to bottom, they know that they're part of the solutions, and they're part of, um, this outcome and achieving that. And that's very much how we can, gain the success. So when I support the chief nurses in my role as the director, that's really what we're elevating and we're highlighting now.
And it's back to that self-governance, isn't it, Jonelle?
Right, right. It's so key. It's so pivotal and key for any, nurse leaders to understand that structure and really support that to be very successful. Absolutely.
Excellent. And Jason, I have to come to you as the correctional guru on the call. You know, how do you challenge? How does that look for you?
It can be a challenge. As you can imagine, you're working in a very security-minded environment for a lot of the decisions that you make. And you really have to allocate for your nursing staff on certain things that they need, but you also have to take into consideration the safety aspect of a lot of things that we do. I think, as we mentioned previously in our kind of introduction calls with each other, simple things that we would carry in our pocket, bandage scissors, or just simple instruments that are day-to-day things that are used, have to be counted and accounted for every day because they can become a weapon at some point. So being safety minded. So when we look at everything from the type of inhaler that we use to the type of medical equipment, how can it be secured? How can it be used in a safe way? But how are we not cutting our staff short on what they can do to provide that quality health care that we need to do? So it does bring up some challenging conversations in the C-suite, as you can imagine. But it gives them another perspective to look at that they don't always understand. It makes sense now when you advocate as to why they need that, why we need to find a way that we can make this work.
Safety's paramount. Absolutely. Absolutely. We've had an amazing conversation today, and I'm going to have some closing thoughts here that I really want to talk about, briefly. But as nurse managers and leaders continue to face new challenges, particularly regarding staffing and organizational structure, Brian, what do you think is the most critical area to focus in, both to ensure that leadership is successful and that we have sustainable healthcare delivery?
Yeah, I think, well, I think it kind of goes back to the last question I was speaking on. It's really finding the balance. I will tell you that even within Banner, our journey, we're on a journey to zero harm. So we're looking to be a highly reliable organization. And so what does that mean? What does it take to get to that? So that means you have to support clinical quality and safety measures to the fullest extent. But then you have to also be a good steward of things in that respect. And um, so when I say steward, you have to be a good steward of the finances and the resources that you have, because obviously you can't just throw resources at something. You've got to have good processes and workflows and things in place that make sense to be successful in that. So I think the biggest challenges are balancing those two things. So getting the clinical quality and safety, having the financial support, the operational support to get there. I also think it's really crucial. It goes back to all the things we've talked about today, the communication, the collaboration, all of those things take place. Everyone has to be marching to the same beat in order to accomplish those things. So yes, nursing has to be on board with that, but our providers and physicians and APPs have to be on board to meet those things. Our CFOs and our CEOs and all the different people in the higher level of organization, but then all of our frontline team members, the ones who are truly doing the work. So we have to make sure that they understand the why that was spoke about earlier. They have to understand why we're doing this and why it's important. And as long as, one of our associate directors here, I love, he always puts it this way. Every time you make a decision, he says, if we're making the decision and putting the patient at the center of that decision, then we're making the best decision. So every time we go through and we think about changing or doing something new or different, how do we get there? Is this the best thing for the patient? And then how we do that, how does that impact everyone on the team? And so as long as we're balancing those things and thinking holistically in the big picture of it all and putting the patient at the center, then we usually end up making the best decision. So yeah, I think that's the basis of it all.
Oh, wow. I'm walking away with that whole notion of the patients at the center of the decisions. And that's really the way it should be. So wonderful. Janelle, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you think are the areas of focus to ensure that leadership is successful and that you're successful in delivering a sustainable healthcare product?
Patrick, it's kind of right. Absolutely. I think it very much is that balance and then kind of prioritizing, again, what is the task at hand or what the purpose or what we need to achieve. And it's really just understanding, again, at the same time, um, one, what is the priority of that? What is its focus, if it's quality or if it's staff and retention, and then approaching it very much in that collaborative environment of that. I think back to say, as many of our other leaders, both Brian and Jason said, we can't do it alone. So you really have to really look at who are the other folks that can help and be a resource to support these strategic priorities, to really lead and to ensure that we're meeting and achieving these successful goals. And at the same time, some of those do have to be that front line to support us and get their input in order to make those successful decisions. And so at the same time, it doesn't put fully the burden on the leader to feel that they have to drive it alone. It's a shared journey in whatever that goal is to be accomplished. And so that really allows us to really ensure that we're successful in achieving that. We talk about that work-life balance, and it's really just ensuring that we are being mindful of the balance of the demands, at the same time what the personal and professional demands are with the work demands, and those that we align with the people, the relationships that we're building as well. And so when there's very much that balance of understanding the priorities as well as your needs from yourself and the teams, that collaboration, that's where you can really achieve that success.
Amazing. The patients at the center, the collaborative approach. So Jason, it all comes down to you.
I almost want to just say ditto, Patrick. I'm
Yeah,
telling you
right.
what, it's like we're all kind of on the same page. It's one team and one mission. Recognizing what you know, trying to understand what you don't know, and what is the difference between those two things. Where do I put it all together to have that big picture? When I approach everything, I need to take a big picture approach. There are pieces to it, but we have to put all the pieces of the puzzle together to see the end picture. So finding that, like you're saying, that balance, that collaboration, becoming that one team with that one mission is what I say is the only way I can wrap it up, Patrick, beyond what they've said.
Excellent. Well, we have had a delightful conversation today, and I'm so appreciative of your learned perspectives. I think you've provided our audience with a number of important executive leadership skills that they can use to move themselves forward and propel their careers. But we've got a lot of questions, and I want to go ahead and get to some of them. So, Brian, this first question is going to be for you. How do you help the team bring their A game and to be invested?
I think that goes back to showing support, having visibility as a leader. I think when I look back at my director role in the ED, the role I had prior to my current role, that was one of the things that was very important for me. Yes, I was an ER nurse, so yes, I understood, what it was they were going through. But even if you're not the subject matter expert in an area and you're a leader of an area, there comes a point in leadership where you may be over an area or of things that you're not the expert at, but how do you as a leader support those team members and make them feel like their voice is heard and that you're there and that you're understanding what they're going through? And then what do you do with that information? How do you follow up? If it's an ER and they're holding a bunch of patients in the ER and they need some inpatient beds to get those patients out because they have more patients coming in and they've got traumas coming in and ambulances coming in, how do you help remove barriers for them? So how do you go and work with the other teams and the other leaders to expedite movement and throughput of your facility? I'm just using that as an example, but it's how you support the team and then provide that follow through on the back end, whatever that looks like in your space. So if the team needs equipment, as we talked about earlier or something, how do you remove those barriers so that they can get the things that they need to be able to perform at the highest level in their job? And when they see that in their leader and they see their leader supporting, then they want to do more for that leader because they want to their leaders helping them get what they need, so then they want to help their leader get what they need. And so I feel like it just kind of compounds on itself. You build that trust through that, and then when you ask them to, for lack of a better term, go to battle for you, then they're ready to do it.
That trust factor is so huge, so huge. Thank you, Brian. Jason, this next question is for you. How important is acute care experience for a leadership role in a non-acute care facility?
Ooh, very good. So as you can imagine, coming into the world where I work as the correctional organization, and a lot of times having the skills that come from these other areas, whether you've worked in that acute care environment, the emergency becomes a very big factor working in S&R environment. But when you start looking at some of the other leadership side of it, it can be like, how do we incorporate this different view compared to what everybody that works in this area looks at? Individuals that have not worked in an acute care environment don't necessarily understand all of the cues, the things that you will see in an acute care environment. So being open and understanding what can come from these various roles, whether they're a long-term care individual that's never worked in that acute care environment, what can my skills having worked in an acute care environment be used for to help that person to understand how it can all come together, to look at it from a different view. So it's important that you have an open mind and you're able to bring those experiences from outside of what your organization may be used to incorporate new processes and new pieces of the puzzle into that plan that can actually improve that patient care.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you, Jason. Janelle, this one's for you. Would it be unreasonable to expect success if one transitions from a floor nurse to a clinical supervisor role, perhaps skipping the charge nurse role?
Would it be unreasonable? No. And I say that essentially from experience, because, as briefly kind of in my introduction, I went from a staff nurse within my first year, actually less than my first year, to being a relief charge nurse. So not even officially hired, but being exposed to the leadership positions. And then within a few months later, I became the interim clinical manager. So again, my own clinical nursing experience was not fully robust, the 3 to 5, but within that small, short time frame, I've learned my own skills, I've learned my resources and how to be a resource to my team. So it's not unreasonable to quickly go if you've exposed yourself and you've gained the opportunities of learning to help build those leadership and those clinical leadership skills, from navigating conflict to leading teams with effective communication skills. If you are applying yourself in different various opportunities, whether it is co-leading your unit-based councils or helping to lead a nursing council. And those are all experiences and competencies that you're building that can help build to transition to that next level. So when you're ready to interview for that, those are what you're going to want to speak to. If the question is, well, yeah, how do you feel that you're prepared for this role when you've never been hired as an official charge nurse? Those are all the things that I advise that you really tap into. And if you haven't gained those experiences yet, that's where I really encourage you to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we've got enough time for two more questions. So, Brian, this one's going to be for you, and this one's a little lengthy. Let me see here. I found often that as a floor nurse, it's been challenging to embrace change, even though it may be driven by metrics or financials. However, when I have inquired further to our leaders, it is indeed from those factors that is driving the driving force for the change. From the perspective of a nurse leader, how much is okay to share with the team, the reasons for the change, et cetera? Do you just lay it out on the table and tell them this is what it is, or do you hide, or is there a hidden sleeve that should be guarded?
Oh, that's a great question. I have always been supportive of transparency. So I think it's important as a leader to tell the why. And sometimes the why is for, maybe financial or operational reasons, but there's usually a foundation for why those operational metrics or financial metrics have been chosen. And then how that's explained to those team members, I think is very important. So I'll give you an example. I like to speak storytell and give examples because I think it's easier. One of the things we monitor and measure here at Banner is called short total breaks. Well, it's your lunch break, right? So we always promote our team members getting their lunch break. Yes, there is a financial impact to that, right? Every nurse taking their 30 minutes, there's financial value in that. But it's also important for the team members to get their break. When they have a busy 12-hour day, they should get their lunch. They should be able to nourish their bodies. They should be able to replenish their mental state for at least 30 minutes to get off, step away from the floor and take a break. Also, if you look at it from the financial perspective, yes, there is financial stewardship in that, but the value of that is that those cost savings are then put back into the team in the form of maybe there's more FTEs that we can hire to then give them more staff on the floor, or maybe it goes towards equipment that they need to be able to be more efficient at their job. So it's how you explain the value and balance those things, and I think that's the important piece, is telling the why, being as transparent as possible. I don't usually hide a lot of the facts. If there's financial truth to it, then I certainly share that with the team. Yes, there is, but there's value in it for you guys too. And this is what those things are. And this is why it supports both of us doing this and meeting this metric. If it's a clinical quality and safety thing, then it goes back to the patient, right? It's what's best for the patient, and that's why we're doing it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. Jonelle, I think we have enough time for one more question, just briefly. How do you help a new leader transition and grow in an outpatient setting to get staff's buy-in for new and improved processes for themselves?
So I can only assume a little bit of the background of this is there might be some pushback from the staff if it's like, oh, well, you haven't worked in this environment. So how do you actually build your credibility per se? I think this is kind of what I'm hearing from that question. And I think with every leader transitioning, regardless if you're going from an inpatient to an outpatient setting, that's where you have to build your team's trust in your know-how and what your skills and competencies are. It's that trust building, and it was actually said, I think Brian, you had said it, it's really the follow through of how you said you're going to support your team and how you follow through with that. And so it's asking again your team, what are their needs, what are their, how they know they can do it, and it's supporting them on those pieces. So however your team says, well, this is what we need, you understand them, you take it back to executive leadership, you let them know if or can it be done. But by you helping to communicate every step of the way of what the change is and getting them to understand why they need to do what they need to do, regardless of the environment, that can help your team learn the confidence with you, build their trust with you, because then you are just helping them to ensure that green light's going, we made it possible, and this is how we did it. So as you continue to build those opportunities to where you support your team, you follow through with how you say you're going to support them, and it becomes a successful outcome. That's how you can slowly start building that buy-in. And that's what you really want to do. Start there with that trust. Get to know them and their why, how they can do things, support them in that way. And that's how you can slowly build that buy-in. So I hope that helps.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
Well, folks,
Patrick,
oh, yeah.
I think I'll add, just to tag on to the back of that, I think it's leading with authenticity and being genuine. And those are key. If you don't take anything else away for that person who asked that question, use those key skills, and that will support your team, and then they'll follow you.
What a great way to end this amazing webinar today. I want to thank you, Jason, Jonelle, and Brian. You've been a delightful panelist group to work with today. And I want to thank all of our attendees who've come in to listen to this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that you do take the opportunity to scan that QR code for the additional webinars that are going to be available through the University of Phoenix, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you all so much.